Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to tonight's presentation by the News Review Presents by Drew Winkelmaier, Managing Editor of the News Review, and Andrew Griffin, reporter. We will begin shortly after but a few announcements first. I'm sure you all know where the bathrooms are, and they're open. And tonight's sponsor is the League of Women Voters of Umpqua Valley. I am Robin Lisbon, president, and we would like to welcome members of the League and Douglas County residents. Lovecraft Collective is recording this event for us, and the recording will be posted on YouTube within the next few days. You can check our website for when it is available. And that's Garrett over there with Lovecraft Collective. Thank you, Garrett. The League of Women Voters believes that individual liberties guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, including the First Amendment, must be safeguarded for all. The core principle of the freedom of the press is that government cannot tell media outlets what to publish or to punish them for reporting controversial or critical information. The press, in the First Amendment, is not limited to traditional newspapers. It also encompasses television, radio, digital media, websites, and independent creators and bloggers. Freedom of speech is a cornerstone of democracy. A free press is vital for democracy, serving to inform the public, hold leaders accountable, expose injustice, and promote transparency. The League also believes that the democratic government depends on informed and active participation at all levels of the government. The League's mission is to inform voters and inspire them to vote. Make sure you're registered to vote. We're coming up to a big election year, and you want to be up on top of your voter registration. Beware of signing petitions before you fully understand what the petition is for, what it says, and who is promoting it. After checking your voter registration in the Secretary of State's office or vote41.org, be sure to vote in the primary in 2026. The election dates are, the primary is May 19, and the general election is November 3rd, 2026. So we're going to talk ground rules, but you might have been handed a paper that tells you all about it, and there's a list over there also. So basically it says we're going to treat each other with respect, and we want you to raise your hand if you need a 3x5 card to write your question on. And then once you're done writing, you can raise your hand and a League member will come by and pick it up, and we will share it with everybody. And I now take great pleasure in introducing tonight's speaker, Drew Winkelmaier. Drew is the managing editor of the News Review, and Andrew Griffin, a reporter, is also here. Now, a little bit about Drew Winkelmaier. I got it mixed up. Was born and raised in Reno, Nevada. Growing up, his time was filled with playing baseball, a sport that would eventually earn him a college scholarship to play baseball at the College of Southern Idaho. Early on in college, Drew discovered a passion for writing, literature, and politics. He took that passion back home to study journalism at the University of Nevada, Reno. His last semester of college, he spent traveling abroad to Alicante, Spain, and later to several other countries. He found his way to Oregon after the pandemic to become a reporter for the News Review, earning several awards for his writing from the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association. He is now managing editor of the News Review, leading a staff of about 10 employees. Now we're going to read Andrew's bio. So we're recording now? Are we recording? Okay, oh, let's do this.
Pull it forward.
Thank you. Duh. Whoops. Here we go. Andrew Griffin was born in Portland, Oregon, and raised in Oregon City. In high school, he was the first introduced to journalism with a job shadow at the Oregon City News and immediately knew it was the career path for him. He studied for 2 years at Clackamas Community College and then another 2 at the University of Oregon, during which time he wrote the Clackamas Print and the Daily Emerald. After graduating with a bachelor's degree in journalism, Andrew would join the News Review in October 24 as their business and health and arts and entertainment reporter. Since then, he's received a first place award in feature writing for the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association and continues to cover stories across Douglas County, Oregon. So let's please welcome Drew and Andrew.
Yeah, well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for having us out and for the library for providing this space for us. When Robin initially reached out to me to give this presentation, I kind of jumped at it. One thing I think the News Review has been lacking in recent years is kind of this face-to-face talk with the community, conversations with the community, so that you guys better understand, our journalistic process and kind of our mentality of journalism. We, or at least I, want the community to engage with the paper as much as possible. So opportunities like this, I'm very excited for. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate it. And the first thing I want to pose to you all is a question. And that question is one that might seem simple, but it really isn't. What does the First Amendment mean to you? We all know what it says, that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. But what does it mean in our daily lives? What does it look like in action right here in Douglas County? There's a reason it's first, not second, not fifth, but first in the Bill of Rights. The founders understood that the ability to speak freely, to share ideas, to question authority, to tell our stories, that is the foundation of every other freedom we enjoy. And without it, everything else begins to crumble. Freedom of speech gives us room to grow, to expand our perspectives on faith, on politics, on culture. It allows us to learn from people who have lived very different lives from our very own. It doesn't limit us or divide us. It's what holds the American experiment together. Every movement for progress, from abolition to women's suffrage to labor rights to civil rights, has depended on this freedom. Without the ability to speak and publish freely, there is no march, there is no debate, there is no vote, there's no change. But here's the hard part. That freedom must be extended to people we disagree with. The true test of free speech isn't when we protect voices we like. It's when we protect voices we can't stand to hear. That's what makes a free society durable. That's what prevents power, political, corporate, or social, from deciding who gets to speak and who doesn't. If we start deciding which ideas are too dangerous or too offensive to be heard, we hand enormous power to those in charge of defining those terms. Who do you feel comfortable with holding that kind of power and defining those terms for the country? History shows us how quickly that power is often abused. Now let's bring that home to Douglas County. Why does the First Amendment matter so much to a community newspaper like ours? Because we are in many ways the living expression of that. We operate on a simple idea that the public deserves access to truthful information so they can make their own decisions. We're not in the business of telling you what to think. We're in the business of giving you the tools to think for yourself. That mission feels especially important now in an age where everyone has access to an audience. Social media has made it easier than ever to speak, but not necessarily to be informed. The so-called marketplace of ideas has gotten crowded, and not everything being sold there is worth buying. Misinformation spreads fast, outrage spreads faster, and truth sometimes gets lost in the scroll. National trust in media has plummeted, and honestly, some of that blame falls on journalism itself. But there's a difference, a big, big difference between the kind of media that dominates national headlines and a community paper like the News Review. Our work is rooted in the community, not in Washington or New York, but here in Roseburg. Sutherland, Glide, Winston, and every place where people care enough to read, to speak up, and to listen in Douglas County. When we cover a city council meeting, a court hearing, a local election, or a neighborhood issue, we're not just reporting. We're exercising and protecting that same freedom the founders wrote about in 1791. Every public records request, every editorial decision, every uncomfortable question we ask is made possible by the First Amendment and the laws set in place to give us that ability to tell those stories. It's easy to take that for granted until it's gone. So when I ask, what does the First Amendment mean to you? I hope you'll think about it not as an abstract legal right, but as a living responsibility, something we all share. It asks us to speak, yes, but also to listen. To engage with ideas that challenge us without anger or resentment, to hold our leaders accountable, and to hold ourselves accountable for how we use our voices. Because freedom of speech doesn't work without curiosity, humility, and courage. And in the end, that's what we're here to protect. Not just our right to speak, but our collective ability to answer, but our collective ability to understand one another. And I wanted to keep it short, but that's kind of my mentality on the First Amendment as it relates to community news. Really what I want and my goal for this conversation or this presentation is so that we can open it up to Q&A and so that we can answer your questions and have that conversation. But before we get to that, Andrew here has put together a short, brief presentation on some of the laws that allow journalists like ourselves to be able to practice and effectively inform our communities. Things like the SHIELD law. So I'll pass it over to Andrew and he'll give that brief presentation before we move on to Q&A. Thank you. Is that good?
Oh, it's up there on the tab.
Is it up there already?
Yep. You can just open it. Got a good slideshow on the right there. And you can
Great.
All right.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, there's the lights down.
Lady on the train. We're going to do that. Or is it here? Oh, this is it.
all right. So, when Drew first presented the idea to me to come and speak with you guys on the First Amendment and specifically how it relates to the press, one of the first things that came to mind to me was Oregon's press laws. Relative to other states, Oregon is fairly empowering to journalists what it allows them to do, and also how journalists' ability extends to the public through laws like these. And I wanted to highlight some of the key ones that have gone into law across the years that empower us. Can you hit the next slide? Thank you. All right. So one of the first and the most famous is Oregon's SHIELD law. SHIELD laws for journalists are fairly common across states. Every state sort of has their own version of them. But back in 1966, only 13 states have SHIELD laws for journalists. And what those laws do is it allows journalists to not have to reveal the identities of their subjects when they're anonymous to law enforcement or any other government agency, any body that seeks to gain that information from a journalist or from a paper. And that got started in Oregon with that woman there. She's in between the two lawyers. That's Annette Buchanan. In 1966, she was a University of Oregon journalism student who was the managing editor for the Daily Emerald, and she was writing an article where she was going kind of doing man-on-the-street interviews with students at the University of Oregon, asking them how they felt about marijuana use. Considering this was Eugene in the 60s, people were pretty leaning one way on it. So she wrote an article called Students Condone Marijuana Use. Following the publication of that article, she was subpoenaed by the Lane County District Attorney and fined $300 and then subject to 6 months in prison time after she refused to give up the identities of her subjects. She felt it violated her rights. She felt it wasn't correct for the Lane County. The Lane County DA to do that. In the end, her case made it all the way to the Supreme Court where it was dismissed. However, within 5 years of that case coming forward and spreading around and becoming a national talking point, a lot of Oregon journalists and a lot of Oregon lawmakers were thinking, hey, why don't we have these laws for our journalists? Why should they have to give up the identity of people in our public who just want to present their ideas and stories that they think need to be covered in the press, stories and truth that they think needs to be presented? So in 1971, a shield law for journalists in Oregon was passed. And this law just means a lot to me in particular because it not only keeps us from being protected from any legal action for trying to keep our sources protected, it empowers you guys to come to us, to speak to us and present anything you have on your mind, an opinion or a fact, and we don't have to give it to the police, we don't have to give it to a government agency or your employer. You can be protected under this law. Jumping forward a few decades, we have one of the next big ones. This is the New Voices Law. This was passed in 2007 by Governor Kulongoski. And this law basically outlines that in a school-sponsored paper, students are fully in control of what goes into that paper. It's not up to school officials. They don't get to vet the content that's published in the paper. This prevents things like prior restraint, which is when an official deems you can't cover this story. If there were to be some sort of major event, some sort of major accident, maybe a protest, and the student wanted to cover, an official, the dean, they couldn't come in and say, you can't cover that in this paper. It's entirely up to the students, and it has to be published. It also keeps officials from doing this really sneaky trick that used to be done with papers in the old days called prior review. Even though papers can't nowadays determine what goes into the papers, they can't have any say on the final publication, they are within their right to ask for a review period where they can read it over and give you feedback. And in the old days before this law was passed, officials would just hold on to these stories and they would just keep them under review. It could be 3 weeks later, you could ask, hey, does that review them? And be like, no, we're still reviewing it, just give us time. And this story just never gets out, it just dies. People don't learn about whatever's being written. I really like this law in particular because it helps protect some of the budding journalists in our community, and especially here in places like I'm from the University of Oregon. I was lucky enough to write for an independent publication with the Daily Emerald. They weren't affiliated with the school, but not everyone has that privilege. So giving students the same abilities that someone at a professional publication would have and allowing the public to interact with them in the same way, I think is really crucial for helping make sure that the future of journalism and then protecting the First Amendment with that gets off on the right foot. The next two, I should say, are really big for me because they don't just empower us and they don't just apply to us as journalists, they apply to the public as a whole, and they give you guys some of the ability journalists have to uphold the First Amendment. This is Oregon's public records law. There's really a few laws that float around with that, but mainly it's kind of under the blanket term of sunshine law. This law refers to the public's right to access public records. Now, public record is pretty much almost any record that's published by a government agency or from an elected official professionally. There's a few exceptions. There's about, I think, like 500 or so types of documents you can't access. An example would be if there's an active criminal investigation, you can't request that out of a police department because it would possibly impede the investigation, things like that, but almost anything else goes. And for journalists, we submit specific requests for this. They're called FOIA requests, but as the public, if you aren't entirely sure where to go, you want information out of a specific agency, all you have to do is just write a letter to them, write an email and request, and they'll help you get to the right place with that. They have to do that under the law. There might be fees with that. They might charge you for having them go through and collect the documentation, but they do have to provide it to you, and if you're denied, you can appeal that with the Attorney General or file a lawsuit to your circuit court. This one, to me, is a huge one for us here in the state because, as I was saying, it empowers you guys to take on the role of journalists yourself. You can look up this information in your own time if you know of anything, or if you're just curious that documentation might exist that would confirm something you think or you're curious about, you're allowed to look that up under this law, and you can bring the truth to light yourself. I think that that's really crucial for not just our state, but the country as a whole for maintaining the First Amendment. The last one on the list is the most recent piece of legislation we've got. It's signed by Governor Kotek in May, and it's going to be going into effect on the new year. As of January 1st, the press and the public cannot be charged with obstructing justice by the police, the government agency, any law enforcement agency for informing the public of their rights. So an example of how that would work in the public for you guys on a daily basis, if a police officer were to come to your neighbor's door and ask for entry for search and they don't have a warrant, you would be able to go over there and get between that just to inform the neighbor, hey, just so you know your rights, they can't enter without a warrant, and just confirm that for them. That officer and that police department cannot charge you with obstruction of justice. As for the press, it allows us to basically print anything we want, whether it be a podcast episode discussing it or a printed article, informing you of your rights. We're allowed to do that, and if some agency determines that that is obstructing their justice, they can't charge us with that. We're just informing you of your legal rights as a citizen. To me, this one is kind of a big ray of hope for us right now, knowing that people and that Americans still are so passionate about this, about maintaining our rights, that they went and secured this deliberate piece of legislation just to make sure that no one's getting in the way of us just freely exchanging information about our rights. And again, this isn't just our ability to do this, this is you guys as well. You can go out and be active with this law yourselves and take on the role of promoting truth. So just to recap before we get into the Q&A session, I think laws like this, some of these big examples, there are more, but they empower us as journalists and you guys alike to promote the truth and to promote free speech and to protect the First Amendment. And I think right now we're at a point where a lot of media and a lot of the big broadcast media that's very focused on sensationalizing and entertainment and just ripping your attention more than it is proper information and promoting truth. And I think if we center and focus around laws like these that don't just give us the ability to act journalistically, but encourage us to do so, and encourage us to do so ethically and in a way that promotes the First Amendment, I think that's really helping secure that for us going forward as a country. Thank you.
That's for you.
First question.
Yes. Maybe just put it there and share it, Mike.
Okay.
Share your pen. Okay, great. All right, got a few questions. Thank you guys for submitting them. And the first one is, on September 16, Jerry Winkelmaier wrote an article about the Charlie Kirk Memorial service at the courthouse. The article included a statement from the editor that the reporter's opinions and beliefs belong to the author, etc. My question is why the article was not on the editorial page rather than on page 2 of the paper. Respond to that.
I believe that was because most of our viewership, most of the people that view our front page, there's more viewership on the front page than there is on our editorial section. I really felt that that story needed as many eyes as possible. I wanted to put out a statement. I wanted to inform the community of not only how I felt, but how some of our reporters felt about that situation. I felt that that front page was the best spot for it.
Okay, next question. What's the difference between a professional, educated journalist and a person who posts notes on social media?
So it actually does kind of depend state by state. What counts as journalism goes beyond just social media posts. It depends on an author's intent. When I was at the University of Oregon, we had a really well-known, I believe it was a formal faculty member who was known around the community for, after his time as a professional journalist, he continued his career solely on social media and with his own public platforming, and that still counts as journalism. You don't have to just be with a print publication or with a major paper or a broadcast station to be a journalist. You can promote journalism on your own time. And under that, like things like the laws I was talking about, that applies to you if you're going with that intent. If you can prove that the intent of your content is journalistic, then you're a journalist. That's how I view it, and that's how Oregon law views it as well.
Today is no better time for independent journalists to really take center stage. The public doesn't really have to rely anymore on those large corporate conglomerations of studios and things like that to get their information. I can name half a dozen journalists that I trust that are solo. They post on Substack, they use social media, they are guests on major news channels that we're all familiar with. So again, like Andrew said, it really depends on intent and reputation as well.
So I'd like to ask, a journalist then is someone who reports something but can also document it, right? Can you define a journalist better than that? I mean, it seems like people post opinions all the time, but they have no basis in fact. But a journalist would have to be able to document, right?
Yes, you and I had a conversation about this. Yeah. Drew and I had a conversation about this earlier about how you define truth, how you define fact. And we came to the consensus it's really just being able to have verifiable, objective information. That's fact, and that's the difference between opinion. You need to be able to back up your claims. You need to make sure that you've done your homework on that, and to make sure that you can prove that what you're reporting, that what you're writing on, what you're covering, no matter what platform you take, is the truth.
Okay, next question. In the interest of supporting and promoting the First Amendment, will the News Review please make letters to the editor available for all citizens to read on the newspaper's website for free? Technically, I believe this is possible as you do allow free read of the posted obituaries.
Yeah, as I've stepped into this role as managing editor, it's been a huge learning curve for me. Yes, obituaries are free, and determining what content of ours becomes available freely for everybody is kind of a balancing act between, we still have to run a business, I still need to pay employees, and what kind of information everybody should have access to. Something I'm learning. And I hope that you all have patience with me. But that's definitely something I am considering and hopefully can make available to everyone for free instead of the free articles, I believe, every week that we were able to make a change with for the paper.
Thank you. Okay, here's a new one. It's actually a few questions. The News Review printed 6 letters to the editor plus 1 local op-ed over a 1-month period from September 8 to October 3rd. Was that the total number of letters your paper received during that time? If not, what percentage of the letters do you receive that does your paper actually put in the paper? And what determines what letters you choose to print? 6 letters a month seems to be a low number for a local paper to receive. Thank you.
Yeah, it's low. I publish them as I get them. I'm not trying to gatekeep or keep anybody's opinion off of the paper. I don't receive that many. There will be 2 or 3 weeks where I don't receive a single one. There will be times where I'll receive 6 in a day, and then I got to stagger them out throughout the next couple of weeks. And then there are some folks who will submit 4 or 5 in the span of 2 weeks. And then I have to make a decision to stagger those out. So I give other people opportunities to have that space to be able to express their opinion. But yeah, there will be droughts where I don't receive any guest columns or letters to the editor very often.
Thank you. When an authority fires or prosecutes anyone who might disagree with him or her, is that not a violation of free speech as guaranteed by the First Amendment of the Constitution?
So I would say that would kind of be a point, or if someone were to come with me with a story idea like that as a journalist, would say, hey, this authority who employs me fired me and I don't feel they did it justly, I don't feel they did it right. That would be a case-by-case basis where, we'd have to do our due diligence as journalists. We'd have to research that authority, whether it's a public entity like a government agency or whether it's a private entity, a business, a corporation. We have to do our research and read up on their laws and on their policies to make sure that that individual, whether they were let go correctly or whether it was unjust. I mean, that would be the kind of thing where you go at it on a case-by-case basis and have to look individually, I would say.
Okay, this is another one about the letters to the editor, so let me see if we can add something to that.
Sure.
After the change in presidents, it appeared that some letters to the editor were not being printed, one of which was my father's, who is a 100-year-old World War II veteran. We know of others whose letters of concern regarding the new administration were not printed, and now we rarely see any letters. Why did this happen?
Yeah, again, there are some weeks where I don't receive any. So again, there's just nothing to publish. When it comes to not publishing any, again, it's one of those things I'm trying to learn whether it's appropriate. And what I mean by that is if you're simply bad-mouthing someone, inciting violence, using explicit language, I'm not going to publish that. Really I'm trying to figure out a good way to be able to balance, people who disagree with the administration or any other topic really, versus people who do agree with or don't agree with the administration. And again, it feels unfair to only publish opinions that disagree, and it feels unfair to only publish opinions that agree, if that makes sense. So again, it's a big learning curve for me to try and find that balancing act. But in terms of this individual case, I would have to go back and see where, but I try and publish as many of them as I can.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, what are the techniques you use to maintain objectivity, reporting facts without personal bias influencing the narrative?
So for that one, it's kind of similar to how I answered before. It's just doing your due diligence and research and not publishing, not letting anything be published or put online until you are absolutely sure you have done your fact checking, you have verified, you have a source that you can go back on and look back and say, hey, this is where I got this information from, this is where I heard it. If someone said it, to you verbally, you didn't have a verified document claiming whether or not it was opinion, or just saying someone said, because you have to put forth that they were the one providing you that information. And making sure that if you're going to make a solid claim as a journalist, it has to be backed up with that fact. particularly in any sort of legal matter. And you got to make sure that you're doing your responsibility and backing up whatever you print and publish.
That's why we have editors. I read every single article. Erica, my news editor, reads every single article. We try to provide as many perspectives as possible. We have a 2-source minimum for any story that we have. And that means that whatever issue you're talking about, whatever controversy or city council meeting or commissioners meeting, that you get both sides of every story. I mean, that old cliche that there's 2 sides to every story remains true, and what I try and promote in my newsroom. And without that, then we don't publish.
Super, thank you. How do these challenges redefine the future of journalism? I guess I haven't listed the challenges. Let's try another one first. How do journalists, news organizations navigate declining revenue, industry downsizing? How does the news review stay relevant?
This is a question that I think every newsroom in the nation is trying to answer. Old ad revenue models don't work anymore, or they're not as effective as they once were. So we need to find ways in order to not just stay relevant, but to be able to go out and chase those stories that we want to be able to chase. We don't want to have such a short staff. We don't want to be so short-staffed that we can't go out and report on something. So that's why we put out a podcast every week, kind of a weekly roundup of all the highlighted stories that we have. We're trying to be more relevant on social media so that we can approach some of these agencies, some of our clients who provide ads in the newspaper and stuff, and offer them new ways to be able to promote their own products or services or things like that. So it's really being creative and trying to find those new ad revenues. And it's difficult. It's difficult. Like I said, I think every newsroom in the nation right now is trying to answer that question, and it's a tough one.
Thank you. Okay, what are the biggest challenges facing journalists today? How do you respond to them?
I'd say from my perspective, one of the biggest challenges facing us today is public trust. I was talking a bit earlier about how I feel a lot of mainstream journalism, a lot of the stuff that you guys will see the most broadcasted on TV or played in public somewhere, is focused on sensationalism. And a lot of the time that means that it gets away from the truth. It becomes less accurate just so it can really focus on getting your attention and getting views and getting clicks, and getting shares. Just spreading it around because that makes people more money in those newsrooms. And for smaller local papers like us, I feel like a lot of that trickles down, and we have to combat some of that distrust that spreads from that. We have to prove that as a local paper, we're not trying to stir that interest. I myself personally, I'm in this industry to spread the truth. That's why I took this job, because I feel like that's a core value for anyone in the world, not just our nation and not just our community. So as a local paper, I feel like I'm trying to have to fight that uphill battle of going against that perception and trying to maintain that and prove to people, hey, we're trustworthy here. You guys can come to us and take our opinion on these things, that we're not trying to sensationalize things just for your use.
So finally, how do these challenges redefine the future of journalism?
I would say for us, it means that journalists aren't just a mouthpiece for the truth. They're not just there to spread that, they're there to also combat attempts to spread disinformation. I feel like now we're the gatekeepers of making sure that doesn't get into our local communities, and making sure that if someone tries to spread that, we're on top of combating that with our own perspective on things and backing that up again with verifiable sources and verifiable proof that these things aren't true. And I feel like that's just an additional task and an additional responsibility that's on journalists nowadays.
Good. How do you navigate the treacherous waters of misinformation?
When I'm consuming the news, I have professional journalists that I trust, and most of them are independent journalists. When I was coming up through the Reynolds School of Journalism at UNR at the University of Nevada-Reno, one of my professors explained that, you might have all of these different sources of information, and typically the truth comes from what each news organization or outlet is saying the same of, if that makes sense. When they all kind of divert and start talking about their takes on it, or, maybe some information that you're only hearing from one source, but not hearing from others, that may not be truthful. And it also comes down to your own, who do you trust? I can tell you who I consume the news from and things like that, but that's typically how I will try and avoid some of the misinformation. If multiple media outlets are saying one thing the same, that's probably the truth. And it's tough. It's tough because you're flooded with social media posts from the public, from journalists, from actors and actresses, all trying to get their hot take in, and you don't really know who's right, who's wrong. Navigating those waters is treacherous. But yeah, just kind of broadening your perspectives and listening to folks that you may never have listened to before, and trying to just broaden your consumption of the news instead of just getting it from one place is something that I would encourage you all to do.
Okay, how is the rapid growth of AI influencing news sources?
So this is something that when I was at UL was just freshly introduced to our curriculum and for things that need to be taught, because it's a growing, I wouldn't say issue, just a growing trend that we're having to face and we're having to deal with and look at pros and cons with. It's still relatively new. We're seeing a point in the AI market where the bubble is kind of bursting on that. Most company investments on that are not showing profit, but a few of the big ones are. And we're now seeing kind of that testing ground period for a lot of that fizzle out, and it's getting a little bit more steady for where it's going to be probably for the next foreseeable future. And as a journalist, we have to face how that might pose both benefit to us and a threat to us. I had heard of papers. For example, one of the big things we have to do as journalists is brief writing. We get a story out, we don't have the time, or we don't have the resources, or maybe it's just a story that can be covered briefly. So we put it out quickly with just hard factual writing. It goes right up on the page in the breaking news line. It's a very common task that all of us share. A lot of newsrooms, or I've heard of newsrooms, taking away their employees that would do that, or moving that responsibility off of journalists and putting it into AI. They'll just run a press release through ChatGPT or something, and then they'll put it right up on the site after a quick proofread, and that task is now taken away from journalists. And I think a lot of us might look at that as kind of a threat, but right now it's just a time where we're kind of feeling that out. We're measuring what AI is going to mean for our industry, just like a lot of industries are doing. And I think we're still in kind of a testing ground period for that.
So is the news review using AI for stuff? Right.
It can be used as a tool, but you have to be very careful with how you use it. I've tried it, I've tested it. Every now and then I'll use it. I find that it's more wrong than right, so I typically try and not use that. So I suppose that answers the question.
What can we as citizens do besides paying for subscriptions?
That's kind of the main way to support us. It's also sharing on Facebook, liking our stories, commenting, engaging, emailing. I have an open door policy. You can come and talk to me. That's the best way to be able to help us out. And I hesitate to bring this up, but you can actually donate to us. You can donate to us through the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association. That is a nonprofit entity, and if you write the check to the News Review, then that money comes to us. If you want more information on that, I've left a stack of cards over there on that table. You can contact me and I can help you out with that. But really the biggest thing is exposure. Again, liking our stories and sharing them on Facebook and other social media platforms, that helps us out a ton.
Well, I don't have any more questions. Do you guys, Connie?
Oh, I just have kind of a quirky question for
Sure.
you. So when you had your display up there, you're talking about college newspapers. And I think it said that they couldn't be told what to do as far as articles mostly. And I wondered what that meant by mostly. I was just curious what they can stop.
So that would be in cases where there's a few. So if a student posts a libel and the paper, like an official is able to read this and be like, okay, that's obviously a libel, and they're able to prove it. All the examples I'm going to say you have to prove. You have to have verifiable facts. That would be an example. Anything that is inciting any sort of disruption or violence on the campus, that would count. An official can get in the way of that. Again, if they can prove that they feel it would lead to that, if they feel that it is inciting it, if they have a justifiable reason with that and they're able to prove it, they can step in and they can say you can't publish that, and the article would not get published. Anything that would be inciting or encouraging breaking the law in any way, that would also count. They can step in cases of that. Things like that are the kind of stories that's when a school official can step in and say no.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So this has been a really good dialogue. Are you thinking of, or have you dealt with like any of the high schools to present this kind of, have this conversation with students or even the college?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea. Again, the reason I was so excited for this to happen was to have that conversation and kind of get the ball rolling so that me or some of my reporters can go out and start having these conversations with especially young people, but to really start to engage with the community. And I think schools are a fantastic way to go.
Gentleman behind.
Yeah, I have kind of a two-part.
Sure.
So what's the demographic of those who purchase the News Review? And then my second one was about, like, I noticed there's a lot of articles that come from other places. And I guess my question is, how do you determine things that are going to be like beneficial to the community with that want to read? Like, not that I don't like to read all of them, but I'm just saying, how do you make those choices as far as balance that revenue? It's like, what's the demographic, and then how are those choices for the articles that don't come locally, and they're not necessarily political, they're more like interest? How do you choose which ones?
Yeah, like our travel page or something like that. Well, when it comes to the travel page, I try and pick stories that are about travel, obviously. And if it's something that, well, to answer your first question about demographic, our demographic, I would say, is majority 45 and up. One of my goals when I stepped into this position was to really capture the attention of folks who are 24 to 35. And really, it's just trying to get that demographic to care about the news, to care about what's going on in their community. And that is easier said than done. When it comes to me determining what goes on to, the Oregon page or the Nation page or the travel page or the outdoors page, I always am thinking first Oregon. Sometimes there aren't any stories out there that pertain to Oregon, unfortunately. So I have to go to the New York Times or the Washington Post. I have to go to other sources of information in order to fill that space in the paper. My dream scenario is to have a fully staffed newsroom of 8 to 10 reporters and 3 editors to be able to fill the entire paper of just Roseburg content. Unfortunately, I have 2.5, 3 full-time reporters. One of them is half writing sports and the other half her other half of the time, she's writing for news. So with two reporters covering essentially two reporters covering the entirety of Douglas County, it gets hard to fill that entire space. So I have to really go out and try and find other sources to be able to fill space in the newspaper. And my first mentality is always whether or not it relates to Oregon. And if it doesn't, then usually I'm picking stories that contain issues or subject matter that is relevant to that time period that I'm picking that story. Yeah, I can give you examples if you want. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
I have one really quick follow-up too. The other one is like the choice. First off, I love the actual physical paper. I know that can't happen every day, but I grew up with it. I just love reading paper. It's like the highlight. You chose Friday to be that published day, and I was a little curious about that because I think there's a huge interest in sports, and most of the high school sports, by the time I could always Google and look them up, but they happen on Friday. And so I'm just curious, why was Friday chosen versus like another day?
yeah, I think a lot of consideration went into that. And I think it was mainly so that there was content through the weekend. So that people could, because we're not publishing on Saturday, Sunday, depending on if something happens. Obviously, we're gonna publish, put something up on the website or something like that over the weekend. But I think it was, if I'm recalling correctly, I believe it was because we wanted people to have the newspaper through the weekend for those 2 days where we're not updating the website constantly or something like that, or our social media. I believe that was the main consideration for that decision. But yeah, I agree. It was tough. When I first started here, I used to go back in the morning and watch the rollers go and watch the newspaper go out. It was tough. It was tough to let that piece go. Having the tangible newspaper, I think is a lot. Is what a lot of people really wanted to keep, but we just couldn't maintain that. Yeah.
When you pick an article from another newspaper, do you have to pay them for that, or what's that?
Yes, we do pay them for that.
Is there a set?
Yeah, so I believe it kind of depends on the media outlet where we're getting stories from. We don't pay them on an individual story basis. It's more like, here's a flat fee for the year. We can use whatever content that you make available to our kind of subscription plan, if that makes sense. We've had to make decisions where we no longer get stories from other media outlets because their prices go too high. And again, we have to make sure that we can keep reporting on the issues of Douglas County. So it gets really tough when I really want to be able to diversify those wire stories from a bunch of different news agencies. But when those costs start to rise, you have to take that into consideration.
And then follow it. Is it possible to get the recipes from the New York Times in?
We do some of the recipes from the New York Times. I'll keep that into consideration though for you. Yeah, whenever we do take a food recipe or a food story, I guess you could say, from the New York Times, we definitely try and put the recipe in there. Yes.
I had been told by somebody who works at the paper that the owner, Mr. Markham, is a very hands-on owner and comes into the office, I think they said every day or something. So my question is, does he ever give input into the paper?
Mr. Markham, he gives the newsroom a lot of independence. More so than I think a lot of publishers do around not just Oregon, but throughout the country. We decide what stories we want to chase down, what stories we want to publish. Every now and then he'll come into my office and say, hey, this is something that you might be interested in. But when it comes to, hey, you have to do this story or you have to do this story, I don't hear that from him.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. In my time with the news review for the year that I've been there, I've never been told I have to cover a story. It's kind of always up to our discretion as a newsroom. I've never had anyone from another department in our business tell me, oh, you have to cover this, this has to make it in. It's just really up to our discretion, and we get a lot of independence. And I think part of that is being a local paper, being smaller scale, gives us the ability to be independent and maintain that compared to other papers.
Like, and too, that I understand that he believes strongly in a local paper, and so he's trying very hard, and would you agree with that?
100%. I mean, we all believe in, we didn't get into the practice of journalism thinking that it was not going to be there someday. We got into it because we wanted to contribute to a community. And I believe Mr. Markham believes in that 100%.
Andrew, is that 1191 bill going to take root in other states?
As far as I know, I haven't looked at what other states are pushing through their legislation so far. I don't follow other states as closely as I do Oregon, considering it's not as directly applicable to our newsroom and to what I report on. I hope it does. I would hope and imagine that laws like that exist elsewhere, and I'm surprised it frankly took so long to get a law like that established here. But I will say that I would hope that it takes on in more states and in more communities.
What exactly is
1191 is the Senate bill that was passed that allows the public and the press to not be charged with obstructing justice or informing people of their rights.
Drew, are you still finding time to play baseball?
No, I'm actually taking up. That's the natural progression from a retired baseball player is trying to do that goal. So.
Great. Well, do you have any more questions, folks?
Anything at all about the way we approach journalism, the way we decide on what stories to chase down, how we go about deciding what angle to take on a story, or how we come up with our questions, literally anything at all. Yeah.
This is none of that, but you mentioned your people that you like to follow. Who are? Oh, sorry.
I listen to a podcast actually called Breaking Points with Crystal Ball. That's actually her name. Crystal Ball and Sagar and Jetty. The reason I like that podcast so much is because Sagar is more of a conservative journalist, and then Crystal is more of a liberal journalist. And they clash all the time. They do so in a professional manner. They give both sides to every story. And one I tend to listen to on a weekly, if not daily basis. I read a lot of Substack articles from individuals. Glenn Greenwald is a good one. I also listen to people like Tucker Carlson and Charlie Kirk when he was still here. I try and broaden my perspectives as much as possible, both liberal and conservative.
Great. Well, I think we can stop here and just socialize, have some coffee and cookie, and come speak to Andrew and Drew personally. How's that?
That's nice.
Good.